Hello, I'm the Awkward GM Corbin, and this is Theo, and today we're going over the Trinity Continuum core games by Onyx Path Publishing. If you're interested in action-adventure games, please check them out. They've got a slight sci-fi theme to them, but they cover a lot of different genres, and I hope you will enjoy even just one. I got all these copies from Onyx Path Publishing as review copies, so take my opinion with a grain of salt. However, I will say I love the game so far, and I've been running Trinity Continuum Adventure for my own group as my main campaign right now. So what is Trinity Continuum? It's a role-playing game using the Storypath system. There is a version of it that uses Storypath Ultra, but I'm not going to go into it right now. Technically, this is the second edition of the original Trinity game that was created by White Wolf back in the day. However, it is currently owned by Onyx Path Publishing, who purchased the rights and are sole owner now. The world itself is very action-adventure based and has a sci-fi bent to it, in revolving around some event called the Hammersmith incident, typically. It might change depending on which game lane you're talking about, but essentially there are three character types based around three energies. Those energies are Flux, which is sort of your probability manipulation energy, Psi, which is your psychic ability, and then Quantum, which is your super powerful, superhuman type ability. And that corresponds to the three character options that you'll see throughout most of the game lines. There are some differences. So Trinity Continuum, the core rulebook, is the base rule set that all the other Trinity Continuum games use. So you need to have this book in order to play the other ones. It has a setting, but most of it's not really covered. It's sort of your catch-all modern day setting where there are about a handful of factions that all tie into the main story of Trinity Continuum. I do have a video on the main story of Trinity Continuum if you want to check that out. I'll post it up above. But in any case, it's a modern day setting similar to our own, and you play as people who are hyper competent individuals. It's an action adventure themed game. I tend to run it more like kind of like spy or espionage like, but really you could be anything. You could be thieves, you could be criminals, you could be cops, you could be anything you want to be in the game. You play as people who are called talents, who are hyper competent. They also have this reality bending ability. Not many people will notice it happening. It's sort of in the background. Your character can essentially take pieces from other alternate timelines and or dimensions and bring it into reality so that they can utilize it. So instead of picking a lock, they might just be bringing a lock from another replacing that lock that they're picking with a lock that has already been unlocked in the alternate universe. That is sort of like a setting secret. A lot of talents don't realize that they are actually doing this because it just feels so natural to them, which is why talents don't typically get called out as being a separate like type of human in reality. Sorry if that's a lot. Trinity Continuum is awesome. I really like the setting. I really like the various different factions that they have. I highly recommend at least trying it out. Yes, you could play just a bog standard action adventure game, but I highly recommend checking out the lore. It's a lot more detailed than I had thought initially. You get a lot of the lore section from reading about the factions. I think it's the Nine, which is sort of like this police force that checks in supernatural events, sort of like X-Files. Then you have Aeon Society, who are the people who know what talents are and study them, as well as other scientific phenomena in the world. I think you have Pharaohs, who are a group that is determined to like help people out. They're sort of like your Charlie's Angels type group, or your A-Team. Or no, Archangel is your A-Team. Archangel is a group of mercenaries who are hired out by a rich guy to help people of the lower classes who can't afford the security that money could provide. It's very interesting. Highly recommend checking it out. Assassins is probably my favorite game in Trinity Continuum, bar none. It is set in the modern day, but you get to play as an assassin character who is kind of like a talent, except all their powers are based around killing people and the act of trying to hunt down your prey contacts and all that stuff. It's very much trying to simulate games like Hitman or movies like John Wick and the TV show Killing Eve, which I highly recommend you checking out on Netflix. I'm watching it right now and it's blowing my mind. I'm really enjoying it. In any case, there's not much to say. I really enjoy this one. If you wanted to play as a badass who is killing criminals for other criminals, this is the game for you. Aegis is the most different of the game lines. In fact, it is more fantasy than sci-fi in my opinion, though it does have sci-fi elements if you look into the setting secrets. Specifically, it's set during the Greek Iron Age, though you don't have to be in Greece for the entire time. You can play characters from Asia or America or anything as far as I can tell. However, the character types that your players have correspond to the three energies I had mentioned before. You have the champions, who are probability manipulators, I believe, as well as the oracles, who are mesmerists or psychics, and then your Olympians, which are their own form of superhero. You're taking on these mythical heroic roles and going through adventures such as defeating hydras, battling minotaurs, or possibly even going through different challenges and quests that are not related to fighting. Storypath does wonderful in social settings, so I don't want to like shoehorn people in to be playing Hercules types when they could be playing someone who's more akin to Orpheus and trying to help rescue someone from the underworld in that sort of fashion. It's very cool, very interesting. I've loved watching actual plays of it. I'll put a link to one up in or down in the description if you want to check it out. Aether is sort of your steampunk setting. You have it during Victorian times, I believe, 1895, where there is a Martian invasion going on, as well as Dracula's castle floating around, a city of Atlantis, and a boatload of other things. It's a very interesting setting from that regard. It's very fantastical. It has you playing as characters who can manipulate Aether, typically. Aether is this substance that's related to the three energies I mentioned prior, and allows people to do super sciencey things like creating ray guns and jetpacks and things that you might find in like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, things of that nature. Squires are your sort of talents of this setting. They are your hyper competent detective type people like your Poirot or Sherlock Holmes. Those are the ones that just come to mind at the moment. But then you have your Gogs and Magogs. Gogs are scientists who are able to manipulate Aether to create sort of super science devices. I remember playing a game of this where we had someone who was using a radio as an Aether device to communicate with the dead. You had the Magogs, who are people who have used Aether not to create devices, but to manipulate their own DNA and to transform them. These are your types like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or I think even vampires and werewolves fall under this category as well. This is probably, if you wanted to do a setting, if you wanted to do Trinity Continuum with supernatural creatures like werewolves and vampires, I'd highly recommend checking out this book and trying to take the rules from it. I think one thing I really like about Trinity Continuum is how you can sort of pick and choose pieces from it to bring into other games. I would say it's very modular in that regard. You can definitely bring stuff in from one setting into another setting. My opinion on Aether, I really like it. It is a cool steampunk setting. I loved playing it when I did, and hopefully I'll get to play it again in the future sometime. Team Wars is the latest Trinity Continuum game line to be announced. It is currently on BackerKit as I'm recording this, if you want to back it and see what it's like. Essentially, it is set in the late 1800s similar to Aether. However, it is off of a branch of the Alpha timeline. It is away from the Alpha timeline that Trinity Continuum normally is in, and focuses on this alternate history where there is something called the Second Steam War, which is going on, where people are battling in these giant steampunk mecha. You play as one of these pilots. Steam Wars is actually a comic book that was created by Larry Blamire. I apologize if I butcher that name. It is a really interesting take on the Trinity Continuum from what I've seen. I do like the mech design is a lot more unique than I've seen in other games, and it definitely has that sort of end of the Victorian era, late 19th century, early 20th century aesthetic. And I really just like the shape of those helmets that they have for the mechs on the front cover. It's just so sleek. I like it. Any case, that is Trinity Continuum Steam Wars. It is currently out on BackerKit. Not much to say about it because I think the manuscript is still dropping. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. Adventure is set in 1934. It is a pulpy adventure, sort of like your Indiana Jones, your The Shadow, The Phantom, any of those stories where when they go from one location to another location, you have a biplane on a map with a red line going from location to location. Reminds me a lot of The Librarian, if you've seen that show on TNT, or The Librarians, which was a TV show based off of the TV movies. It's a really fun pulp adventure game. I'm currently using this to play a sort of Cowboy Bebop, Outlaw Star, Firefly inspired game. You play as daredevils, who are your talents, who can manipulate probability. They're your like, I'm just gonna punch the guy, or I'm gonna knock this guy out. I'm gonna throw my whip and go woo and all that stuff. Whereas your mesmerists are your hypnotists, your psychic type characters, similar to the Shadow, which I know is a niche reference, but I loved the Shadow when I was a kid because my dad indoctrinated me on Pulp Adventure. But basically, he was a detective who could use his powers of mesmerism to make people not notice he was around. Then you have the Stalwarts, who are sort of your more actiony, like supernatural-based characters. I don't know a good example of this off the top of my head, but the example they have in the book is like this person who's got like a fist that has turned to stone or ice or something. They are your people who have a slight magical ability, or at least some sort of magical ability that is akin to like physical strength. They have the ability to do things more superhuman-like. Adventure is probably my favorite of the game lines because it takes the three concepts of the talent, the psychic, and the aberrant or the superhuman person, and puts them all together in a way that makes them balanced out in a way that's good for crossplay, to for lack of a better term. That's what I like about Adventure. It's probably my favorite of the game lines so far as the mechanics go. As far as the setting goes, I'm not much of a 1930s type person, so I I did mine in space. However, I will say, as far like Adventure is definitely there to say, hey, do you want to just punch some Nazis right now? So if you're up for that, I think Adventure is for you. Aberrant is a very popular setting for Trinity Continuum. It is set in 2028, in the not too distant future, where superheroes exist. In an alternate history 2018, an event occurred which caused a bunch of people on planet Earth to erupt with superpower abilities. These powers were things that could be crazy, like noticeable, like being able to shoot fire out of your hands, or laser beam eyes, or like control plants and things like that. Or it could be very subtle, such as being able to control electronics, or shapeshift, or manipulate people's minds, and things of that nature. Now, These novas do have some downsides. They will occasionally get quantum flux, which causes them to sort of mutate and turn more monstrous, which is why it's called aberrant. They go from being novas to aberrants, with aberrant being sort of this slang slur term for novas, or against novas rather. Now, the story guide section of the book for game masters does say you can move a slider around as far as what type of setting you want to play as. You want to play as a comic book like setting, like the original Batman comics or Teen Titans or anything like that? Or do you want to play a deconstruction of the superhero genre, such as your The Boys, the Invincible, or anything like that? I will say Aberrant is a setting that I'm interested in. The only thing that's a downside to it for me personally is that there's a slight barrier to entry where to build your character you need to spend 150 XP points to get your character to how you'd like it to be. So if you want to have super speed, you actually have to spend parts of your 150 XP to increase your speed and things of that nature. And there's some throwing power tags around and things of that nature to create custom abilities. If you're someone who really likes character building, I highly recommend Aberrant. Anima is probably my second favorite of the Trinity Continuum game lines. It's set in 2084 after Aberrant, where basically all the novas effed off into outer space and Earth is left to rebuild. It is set in a cyberpunk dystopia future where people are playing virtual reality video games that are being used by a shadowy corporation to test their various unethical experiments. You get to play as cybernetic talents who can use virtual avatars known as animas in a digital world. Now, this setting is probably one of my favorites because I really like cyberpunk fiction. I also really like LitRPG. I've read a fair number of those books, like Awaken Online. I used to watch Sword Art Online before, and then I, of course, love cyberpunk, in which case I've read books such as Snow Crash, Neuromancer. I love Max Headroom, the TV show, which is underrated in my opinion. In any case, Anima is definitely the type of game where you are going up against the system, you are rebelling against it, but you have the ability to go into digital worlds and manipulate things. There are a couple of factions in there. One of them is my favorite faction in the entire game. Maybe tied for first, which are the Ghost Wolves, who are people who can manipulate probability, who are talents, typically talents, who can actually use their abilities in games. When I played a actual play of this for Onyx Path Con a year or two ago, my character actually was like doing dramatic editing to like change reality a bit in the game world, and it looked like he was doing the horse glitching tricks from like Skyrim or something, where he was like standing on a sheer cliff at a 90-degree angle and things like that, which was fun. In any case, I highly recommend Anima, especially if you love cyberpunk, and if you love LitRPG, highly recommend it. Trinity Continuum Aeon is the furthest in the future the game lines have gone so far. It is set in 2123, and it's sort of a space opera game with psychic themes. So like kind of like having Jedi or something of that nature, but instead they're not like your psychic monks. They are psychic operatives known as scions who work for the government or corporations or any other people who can pay well enough. There are a bunch of different scion, I think they're called orders, who specialize in different psychic fields, such as like telekinesis, telepathy, a bunch of other ones. I'm not going to list them all out. The setting is definitely space opera in that you can have you can have space travel. There are aliens and other creatures that are out there. as well as focusing on the aberrants who left Earth and have gone out into space to create their own communities. The Scions can be space opera, can be Aeon can be a space opera, but it can also be a cyberpunk dystopian as well. The world isn't perfect. You do have humanity reaching this level of technological progress. The moon is colonized and stuff like that. But you do still have issues such as wars and people who are trying to abuse other people and governments who are suppressing suppressing revolution and things of that nature. Highly recommend checking it out if you like the Mass Effect series or Babylon 5, Battlestar Galactica, things of those nature. I'm trying to think of any other shows that had psychic powers in it that would be of interest, but I'm coming up with a blank right now. Anyway, highly recommend. It can be a little bit finicky with how psychic powers work, but I think it's once you get started with it, it'll become second nature to you. So if you want to play Trinity Continuum, I highly recommend checking out places like the Onyx Path Discord, the Onyx Path subreddit, the Onyx Path forums. They do have looking for group sections in most of those. Additionally, Start Playing does have paid Trinity Continuum games. If you do a filter for them, I believe you'll find a few. I know Tom Murr, who has done work with Onyx Path before, likes to do stuff for it, so I give him a shout out as well. Other than that, there are definitely a lot of actual plays out there. Onyx Path Publishing has them on their YouTube page. I know Dork Tales has a few Aberrant games going on there because Kelly loves Aberrant, I think. And from that, I will say that there is also the Storypath Nexus Game Jam right now, because Storypath Nexus is the equivalent of like a DM's Guild or Storyteller's Vault, where community can create their own content for the Trinity Continuum games, as well as Scion they came from, and Dystopia Rising. So all of that said, if you want to check out the Storypath Nexus Game Jam, I'll put a link down below to the rules if you want to participate. There will be a voting section if you want to try and if you want to do some voting for what you think should win the game jam. Please do that. Other than that, I think that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good one.